Good evening. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us in our next installment of our Community Conversations, a collaboration between the Beverly Public Schools and the City of Beverly. I'm happy to have you all here in person and our panelists. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And for those of you at home watching, we welcome an opportunity to interact with you as well. Just a quick note for those of you at home, we will have an opportunity to address your questions that you might have. If you see a chat feature or comment feature on YouTube channel, please enter your questions or comments there, and we'll get a chance near the end of the program to address those. Welcome. At this time, I want to introduce or have the panel introduce themselves to everyone. Why don't we start with you, Julie?
Good evening, everyone. I am Julie Smith. I'm the principal at the Centerville Elementary School, and hello to people at home, and thank goodness there are people here with us in the room with us tonight.
Hi, my name is Ronnie Jacobson. I am the Constituent Services Director for the Mayor's Office.
Hi, my name is Keisha Johnson, and I am a mother of two here in Beverly. I also chair the Human Rights Committee, and I also am a former resident here at Apple Village.
Hi, good evening. I'm Rachel Abel. I'm the Ward 1 School Committee representative and also mother of two children here in the Beverly District.
Hi, I'm Sue Chirochek. I'm the superintendent. I'm excited to be here and also glad to have an audience to talk to, so that was great.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Oliver. I'm the principal at Beverly Middle School and really pleased to be here. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Betty Taylor. I'm principal at Beverly High School.
Good evening. I'm Todd Rotundo. Excuse me. I'm Todd Rotundo of the City Council of Ward 1 up here in Apple Village. Welcome, everyone.
Many thanks. We're certainly glad to have each of you here on this evening. This is an interactive discussion, and so we're excited to have each of you as a part of the discussion. There are three areas that we are going to focus on this evening. One is the intentionality of race equity work and being anti-racist. Our second area is going to revolve around culturally responsive teaching, and then our third area is going to hit family engagement. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and get started with our questions. We are going to ask the mic, whoever has it, if they will pass it back down to the other end. Between myself, I'm Andre Morgan, and my colleague, Abu Toppin, that will facilitate tonight's discussion. Just as a word, for those of you who are tuning in online, you will have an opportunity to include your questions in the chat, and to, at the end of the session, when we open the floor up for Q&A for our in-guest audience and for our virtual audience, we will take some of those questions at that time. Abu.
Thank you, Andre. So let's get started into our questions. We've talked a lot over this last year about being intentional in the things that we do as we're being anti-racist and addressing systemic racism in our society. And I think it's important for us to flesh that out and have that conversation a bit more. And with that, again, panelists, two or three of you to address some of these questions. But let's begin with the first question. How do you respond to community members and families who question why we're intentionally creating programs or policies to dismantle racial inequities? Who would like to take that first? Rachel?
Thank you, Kaja. So I think that we all have to understand that we are part of a global community, a global economy. There's so many reasons why we need to be bigger than ourselves. And I think an important aspect of our district and part of our mission is preparing everyone to be part of a global community. And sometimes that means that we need to intentionally create opportunities for growth in our community, with our students, and with our community at large. I think it's just of the utmost importance that we think beyond ourselves.
Thanks, Rachel. I agree. I also think that we're being intentional because the time is now. And I don't know if the question is necessarily why we're moving forward, but I think the question is why not? We know better. We know that the racial inequities are there. And so it is our responsibility as parents, adults, teachers, educators, to do better and to model that behavior for our children and our youth.
I think the simplest answer from an educator's point of view is it improves student learning. Because not only does it give us another way of approaching how students learn and hearing how students learn and listening, not only with what Rachel was saying about opening the wild world, but making the classroom more relevant for the student. So what we think is important content, we're able to reach them, and what they share with us gives us some more insight into content. So I think it makes you a better educator.
Thank you, Betty. I also just want to add that I think that it allows us to improve relationships with one another, which is the cornerstone of the work, and that clearly tackles any prejudice that we might have.
Oh, I was just sending it down. Thanks the rule of 2 to 3.
Thank you. Let's move on to number 2. I had a thought, but I'm going to save that. I'm going to save it. Where do you see prejudices or inequities being played out in your own settings, and how might acting with intent help to disrupt those inequities?
Thank you, Abu. Right here, we're sitting in a place where we see a lot of inequities. Not to anyone's fault, we like to think, but the reality is we have a situation here at Apple Village that, with your help and many people throughout the community, where we're intently trying to recognize people up here, simple with transportation, getting people up here more involved within the city. It's an island of its own, but there are a lot of inequities here. The things that we've been talking about for the last year and a half is we can identify directly here in Apple Village, but there are other parts within our city as well. Some of our homes that are down on Ball Street and over down on Story Avenue and stuff like that. So there are a lot of sections that we have to really start concentrating and really trying to include. I know we've been focusing on Holcroft as well. So as a city, we're starting to intentionally really get harder into it, but we're identifying it right here. Being up here tonight is really a great example.
So I'm glad this question is back, because we addressed it a little bit in our last forum, and we had a little bit of an opportunity to talk about it. But when we think about prejudices or inequities in our settings, I think to the schools, and I try to think to what are the barriers, what are the objects that are in the way of really us achieving that all means all mentality for everything that we do. I think that it goes without saying, one of the things that's a problem for us in the schools is that we tend to perpetuate the barriers unintentionally, right? So identifying what they are. Is it scheduling? Is it lack of access, lack of opportunity? Where do we look to? Are our procedures or our policies actually setting up barriers for people before we've even had a chance to address them? And so I think school years roll year after year after year, and we tend to not revisit and take a look at what is in that policy that might be in the way? What is in the way that we're doing business here that's getting in the way? And so it's not intentional that we're doing it, but I think what we need to do is have intent to undo it and to take a look at what's going on and what we need to do differently in order to make the playing field more accessible for everybody. So.
I think that the question of where, in my settings in particular, when I think about myself being a black parent here in Beverly, I think of everywhere. I think of in the school system. I think of in City Hall when you walk in the hallways, how many people of color do you see on the walls? I mean, how many people do you see working there that look like me, that look like my son, look like my daughter? I think about the grocery store. I think about here. I think about housing. I think about opportunities and access that I may or may not have had growing up that maybe someone else did. I think about systemic. I think about maybe it not being intentional right now, but I think that it is all of our responsibilities to accept responsibility day to day for where we are, and I think that that's the only way that we're going to see some change here. If you see something, say something. I think it starts there.
I think I'll add just a comment around an inequity that we were talking about today. And I guess I want to be more specific. I feel like sometimes when we're at these conversations, we speak in these very broad terms. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Well, what does that look like? And so just putting on the table, I think Beverly as a city, I would love to challenge us to have a greater breadth of opportunities for children after school. I see a real inequity there in sort of who has access to after school opportunities. And I think families also are looking for places for their children to go after school. I also know when those opportunities aren't there, it impacts work schedules, and I think it makes it very challenging. So that's one thing that I feel like I see regularly in our families, and would hope that we could tackle something more specific together as a community.
Makes sense. One of the other things too that just quickly I'll say, when you think about when I thought about this question myself in your own settings. One of the things that I've said to people in the past is to challenge you to, in your own personal settings, when you're at home, when you're with your friends or other colleagues in your own space, when you hear somebody say something or reference something, do you correct them? Do you lead them to another resource to say maybe you should think about something a little differently, be a little bit more curious as opposed to defensive? That intent is just as important as what we do as a school district or as a city, because that's kind of really where it lies a lot of times when people are at home and feel like they can show their true colors. But if we're not intentionally saying to them, Uncle Joe, you can't say that anymore, just because you've been saying that for years and you're old, doesn't mean we can't correct you or point you in the right direction to rethink something. So I think it needs to play out there as well. Our third question on this topic: why is it important to intentionally build diversity in our city and school district workforce?
I can start. I think intentionally building diversity in our workforce, whether it's the school district or the city, really allows our children, our communities, our families to see what's possible for our kids' future or our own future. I know that's very near and dear to my heart. My teachers were very intentionally given jobs. I grew up in the Newton public schools. There were many teachers of color, as far as I was concerned as a 7-year-old, that were very intentionally hired by my principal. And that was really important to my education, to see other Indian or Black teachers not only in those roles, but also talking about what makes them different, what makes me different, and why that's important, and how I can succeed going further. And, I think those special relationships have also really helped me in life. Those same teachers have continued with me as now my friends throughout life. And I think that's really important.
So I appreciate that very much. I think that thinking forward, I work in my professional career for a global multinational company, and I have to say that there is so much strength in diversity having the experience of working with different cultures, different religions, different languages sometimes, I mean, has been so rewarding because it isn't just a certain way, and it never should be just a certain way in whatever you're doing, whatever the endeavor might be. I think representation matters a lot here in our school district and in our city as well. But I think that in the bigger picture of things, having more voices, bringing more ideas to the table does nothing but strengthen the opportunities that are presented to us.
Yeah, thank you. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and listening to different people talk, but I fear that if our schools are led and filled only with white people, then everyone that's attending is going to believe that this school was built for white children instead of that it was built for all of us, right? And so I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that I see if we aren't able to do a better job of attracting a more diverse workforce, that it's still going to look like someone else's school and that it's not my school. Mm-hmm. And so that's one area. And as well as I think as we make decisions and as we plan and as we build lessons, if we are all of one, all white people just building the lessons, we're looking at it from one perspective, and it makes it much more challenging and much more difficult to be more inclusive and to make everything be more representative. So,
Katie, did you want to add something?
Thank you so much, Dr. Trocheck. And I just wanted to add that being a child and seeing possibility, I think, is much different than being an adult and seeing possibility. And I think being a child, you really have to see it. And I think in order for you to believe you can be it, I think it has to look like you. And I think that it's important for our youth in terms of role models, in terms of even our hair, our culture, what we eat, what we bring for lunch. Someone, who's in a position of authority that can sit down with you and say, oh, I had that last night. Even that is something large, that's big and it's major. And, I think it starts at home, as Abu was saying, and a close friend of mine, Kitia, I always think back of how she brought up a point to teach our children to love, and care for, even as young as dolls, dolls of all color, and to be gentle with them, and to, make sure that, we're telling our children that, we're all beautiful the way we are. And I just wanted to add those couple things.
Thank you. Andre?
So as we move into our next segment around culturally responsive teaching, one of the realities, both from a district and from a city perspective, is there has been some pushback in the community about having conversations around diversity and even teaching it in our schools and advocating it in city programs. So to our panel, why is it important to teach our students? And we just heard why it's important for adults. But why do our students need to know about the importance of appreciating diversity as part of a wider student body?
I think this is such an important topic, and it's important to teach our students how to be global citizens, and it's our job to teach them to respect different cultures and different social groups, because as they leave us and go into the workforce, those are skills that they need.
Since I have the mic, I'll just jump in. I mean, I think we are diverse, and I think sometimes we make a lot of assumptions, even if we look across a table of largely, mostly white educators, or a school of mostly white educators. There's still diversity there, and I think that we have to sort of question our presence with each other and remember that it is who we are, like it is the life that we live, and just kind of opening up those conversations for kids and bringing them into that, I think is really important. I don't think it's this other thing, and I think sometimes we treat it as this other thing, and it's really just the way that we are with each other. And I think that there are very intentional ways that we can bring kids into that conversation and have them share of themselves and share of ourselves in that, and make it more relevant. And I think the word that I want to use largely is relevance. That's where it feels, education would feel relevant to students if they had a way into that.
I just would like to add that I think it's really important to teach students to love themselves for why they are diverse, for their differences. And I think in the moment, a lot of times kids want to fit in, whether they are a person of color or not. And oftentimes kids of color, I know I've felt this myself, being other is so, so tough. And I think if you're teaching diversity and why it's important, I think kids will feel a little more comfortable with being different, because they're going to be different the rest of their lives. And everyone's going to be different, but specifically for kids of color.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just want to jump in for a quick second, because I think it's really important. We use this term culturally responsive teaching, but I'm not so sure that everyone has the same working definition of what we mean when we say that. One of the things that I think in Beverly, the approach that we're taking is that it's really an approach to connect students, cultures, languages, and life experiences to what they're learning in school. And so when we think about that, that's a really broad definition of what we can do, but it has some really important outcomes. First of all, it raises the expectations for all kids. Culturally responsive teaching is asset-based. It's all about identifying the strengths within a person and being able to identify, you have this strength, how do we connect you in this way so that what you're learning has more meaning. It helps us in the schools meet the needs of underserved populations of students. It helps us identify and better tailor our instruction for that. It builds cultural competence for everyone, not just for someone who feels different, but for everyone in the classroom to have this appreciation for all of the cultures. I remember when I was in my doctoral program, and we were really at the very beginning of my journey learning about racism and anti-racism and what we would do and what we couldn't do. I was on a project with another person, and it was a woman of color, and I kept looking at her and going, but in Beverly, what difference? How can I make a difference in Beverly? And she said, you have the biggest job. You have to make a difference. You have to bring everyone into the conversation and improve the cultural competence of all of the white students, of all of the students, not just focus on how do I make students of color feel more comfortable. There's a bigger job and a bigger sort of purpose for what we do with culturally responsive teaching. And then finally, what you've all been talking about, it really does build the value. Students can feel valued, and that relationships are really developed around trust. So I think there's sometimes people, when we say culturally responsive teaching, this vision of let's just make sure we cover all those holidays so everybody's holiday is mentioned once, but that's not what we're talking about. We're really talking about a different approach and how we can engage students in a different way.
Thank you, Dr. Chirocek. And I just wanted to add to the importance of appreciating diversity. I think it's important that all of our students feel welcome. And I think we should talk a little bit about, how our students and our youth they're our future. And they're really the ones who are going to be driving this. We're guiding them the best we can, and this is a part of that. We live in a predominantly white neighborhood with predominantly white classrooms, teachers, predominantly white students. And so it is our responsibility to expose all of our students to all cultures. And I think that that's really important.
And so given that context, how can we become more culturally responsive? And this is from a district perspective. This is from a city perspective. This is even from a family perspective.
For me, it just seems communicate and educate. I mean, the reality of it is if we don't communicate with each other, I know I've had conversations, with certain people, even with Kasia. It's, through her experiences, me learning her culture, I'm learning about other cultures as well. Listen, I grew up a white man. I can't change how I grew up, but for me to understand, it's by me having conversations with people of color or people coming from different backgrounds. I can identify with certain situations, whether you're white or black. It doesn't make a difference. Poverty's poverty. But when it comes to, what you do in your own life, I don't know traditions that have happened, from a person of color. There are different, things that they do. I can read on it, but sometimes for me, it's easy by me having conversations with people. That's how I can learn better, to identify better.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I think for me, the struggle is, how do I do that? How do I do it well, and how do I do it responsively? And some of it definitely communication. The big piece is listening and hearing what I'm missing. I think that's what I'm starting to learn about myself, that sometimes I'm missing a piece of information, or I'm missing a theme, or I'm missing a value. And actually the last few years, and maybe COVID has helped a little bit with this, because there's a lot of frustration about so many things that people have been voicing frustrations. And of course, that whole year was also wrapped around George Floyd and all other events and other things that we had to struggle with. It's a struggle. It's not something that you can get a program out and it's all done. And it's something I think that always has to adapt and be flexible. I think in some way what we'll have in the long run are hopefully a stronger educational program that meets the needs of the kids, new traditions, because Beverly High School is very big about traditions, but we'll have some new traditions, and 15 years from now someone said, we always have done that, and I'll be able to say, no, actually I know when it started. And I think the other piece is this idea of being able to build a new knowledge, and then being able to apply it. And that, I think, if I speak for myself, that's where I am. That's where I think my school community is working. We want to learn, and we want to hear, and sometimes we stumble along the way, but we want to keep going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. You hit on something that I was reflecting on with this question. It's about staying curious, committing to the growth mindset, and to being lifelong learners. I think that it's important, and one of the things that we can do to become more culturally responsive is to look outside ourselves and ask those questions, to listen intently, and to not, fall victim to some assumptions, or I don't need to know about that. Being curious, being lifelong learners is a real important piece of the equation.
Thank you, Rachel and Betty Taylor. I appreciate that. And I think also, just to go a little bit into what you were saying about listening, I think it's important that we are active listeners, and also that we're taking time to believe folks that are coming forward with experiences, because I think that's what comes with growth and with the radical change that is here right now. So even as educators, if there is a situation and a parent is coming to you and you're not quite sure how to handle the situation, I think that it's okay to say, I don't know, but let me get some more support so that I can help you.
Just to add one more thing, I think, as teachers and community members are adults, I think we can lead with compassion and empathy and really role model listening, to go on what you're saying. And I know in my role, I really prefer to meet people where they are, as opposed to waiting for people to come talk to me. And I think that's also an important part of being culturally responsive.
You know, I know I'm supposed to talk into the mic, but I'm going to use my teacher voice right now. I was watching a really interesting telecast about a week and a half ago, right before the Thanksgiving holidays, and it was about culturally responsive teaching. And one of the panelists made this remark, that culturally responsive teaching has unjustly altered instructional strategies in a classroom. And so my question to the panel, are traditional instructional strategies effective for all learners?
So I'm going to start with that I don't think we believe that traditional instruction is going to meet the needs of all learners, whether or not we're talking about race, whether we're talking about learning differences, or whether or not we're just talking about different individuals in the classroom. So we've been talking for a long time about new ways of providing exploration and providing instruction, starting with project-based learning, starting with relevance, starting with authenticity, and revisiting all of those things. So, I don't think that, I will leave it to the principals to say, but I don't think any of us are relying on what, and maybe I'm aging myself, what I would consider traditional sage on the stage type of instruction. I think that's shifting and changing in all of our schools. And so I think that, and we've had this conversation before, we've spent a lot of time in our schools revisiting instruction and making sure that we're, looking at tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 instruction, which really just means what are we doing for everyone, and then what do we have to do differently for some of the students that have differences within the classrooms for a long time. I do believe, however, that it's been only in the last couple of years that we've layered that lens of race and ethnicity into our equation to say, gee, do we have to think differently about students of color or students with different ethnicity or different languages in the classroom? And so that's a newer addition to how we're sort of trying to revisit what we're doing and how we're devising our plans and lessons in the classrooms. Right, so the universal design for learning that Kej is talking about is really just taking that opportunity to make sure that we're providing instruction with multiple means of representation and multiple means of expression, so that we're not just one size fits all. Everybody gets this, and I'm going to deliver this dose, and either you're going to learn it or not, and whatever score you get on the test is going to tell me how well I've done. But rather, what do I have to do to make sure that everyone's voice is heard and everyone has a way of letting us know what they have gotten out of the lesson.
All right, so our next question for our panelists, is there a need for more culturally responsive discipline as well as instruction? Any takers?
Well,
Yeah, so discipline is one of those areas that has always had me concerned and my curiosity piqued, because I do raise my own children to make sure that their behavior is consistent with expectations in whatever situation they're in. But I do know that my children, being both females, white, and a little bit on the quieter side, that's never really been an issue in a school setting. And I do have a fear that sometimes we ask our children to be expressive, and then at the same time we tend to punish those opportunities where children have the opportunity to speak out, to sort of ask questions and to sort of stretch and grow their own selves. And so any time that I look at how we report discipline to the DESE, I have to wonder, where is the balance within our district? Which level of disciplines are the reported ones, and which students were most affected by those? And so that's something that I'd like to, continually explore with all of our district, just to make sure that we recognize that some of the items that end up being a discipline issue could be disproportionate based on the individual student, whatever their situation may be, and that we need to have some consistency and make sure that we're not unfairly targeting certain subgroups within our schools. I think that, that's a whole different set of subgroups as well. So just leave it at that.
I was just going to add that I think that there is a need for discipline wherever there is any kind of initiative. I think that if we are going to implement culturally responsive teaching, I think that means that we have to be held accountable to that. And so I think that that's really all that discipline means, is that we are committing to being culturally responsive.
And I think, too, when I think of discipline, I think that it's coming on the tail end of someone acting out in some way. And so my first question is always why? What's going on? And is this situation the response to something that I don't know about yet, right? And so is there more that I need to learn? And also, I think it's important because we do have a building with 1,470 middle schoolers going around. There has to be some rules. There has to be some boundaries. And so how do we make sure that we're creating reasonableness in what we ask kids to do, that there's some voice in how that works, and that there is some accountability for what we need? Because we do, you can't put 1,475 through 8-year-olds in a building and not have rules and responsibilities for behavior and some of those things. So we have looked, I think, at various kinds of discipline. What do we mean by that? But, for example, there is restorative justice as opposed to a punitive outcome to something that happened, more a look at what happened, why did it happen, and how can we improve the outcome of what this happens, and is there learning to be had? Because we are a learning institution. That is what we're supposed to be doing, is educating. So how do we make sure that when we are looking at every situation, we're kind of peeling the onion back to know what happened in all aspects of this situation?
So there really are no discipline issues at the middle school? No, I'm just kidding. Just want to clarify that. But I do want to just bring up a point, too. When I have a student that is directed towards me and comes into my office, the first thing that I say to them is, tell me your story. And I always say, I want to hear your voice and hear your side of what has happened so that we can have a conversation about it. And if there has been, but there really never is, a discipline issue, we also involve students in how do we solve the problem? How do we restore this? What do you think is a logical consequence that would fit what this situation is too? So, and I'll keep saying this over and over again tonight, but those relationships are so important. And if students have a safe adult that they can go to in the building, it makes all the difference. And you're able to have those conversations because you have trust.
So to my co-moderator, I'm wondering if you'd be open to a little bit of an adjustment. So since time is flying and we're having lots of fun, let's see if we can get one question in on family engagement, and then let's open up the floor to our in-person guests and our virtual guests for questions for the panelists.
Sounds good to me.
Well, you're not good.
I was ready. The family engagement piece I think is an important topic to discuss. And I know we're going to just go through one question, but I think we need to we'll continue these conversations. So how do we engage our families in all that we do at the school district and in the city, right? It's important to understand that connection with our families on an educational level, but also how things affect our residents in our city with our boards and commissions, the different things that we're doing and different initiatives that are happening in the city, different changes that are happening in the city. What engagement are we doing to bring all of our families into the fold to better be aware, participating, but also feel a sense of acknowledgement and a need for them to participate in a way that allows their story to be part of what we all do here. So with that, How do we promote the importance of family or community engagement?
I just want to say this. Don't just reach out when there's an issue. I feel like more often than not, sometimes it seems that when family engagement begins, it is a phone call with such and such has happened, and and so I would love to begin that somewhere other than an issue.
I was just sitting here, and as you were posing the question, I was listening to the question and thinking, it's pretty much everything we've been talking about tonight, right? So it's about representation in the school. So the same feelings that students have, families have. And so if there's no one in the school building and the teaching staff or in authority that looks like you, then it's not going to feel like that's your school. And so it's a little harder to walk over the threshold and join in and become part of all of the things that are going on. Do our opportunities for family engagement include the kinds of opportunities that families are looking for, or are they all representative of what our white families are looking for, right? So I think that it's all of the things that we've been talking about together, revisiting what our barriers that we keep perpetuating over and over again in our own institution of education, at least on the education side, are doing. But even in the community level, we've talked before, what about minority-owned businesses, and how are they welcomed into some of the work within the city community, and how are we, supporting and promoting those within all of the community opportunities that are available. So I think it's just like all of the things, everything is all the same. We really all need to add that intent into everything that we're doing to make sure that that lens of equity is in all of the pieces of the puzzle as we put them together. So.
Anyone else?
I don't know that I have anything particularly insightful, but I think after the pandemic and the closure and finally seeing people a little bit more than we have in the past, like last year, you think about school, we didn't invite people in. Everything was virtual, and we're seeing a little bit more of that now. There's still been some hesitation around in-person events, but I think it's something that we think about. We think that there was a little bit of a pause, and we have an opportunity to do this better. So what are the things that we want to bring back that we feel are fruitful for families and meaningful for meaningful experiences? And so I think that question's on the table. We know we have flexibility with virtual options. Just I don't know how many people are at home listening right now, but that feels good that we are providing more access points, and we do that sort of without thinking. But I also think when we get back to those in-person, we track everything from a school. So when we do an event, we look who's coming, how many parents come to our curriculum nights, how many parents come to our conferences, like where are we missing people, and what format do we tend to get more families involved? And so it's something that we definitely are looking very closely at. Because I feel like we're getting back into more in-person events. So,
I think that it's really important, and I was having a conversation earlier this morning, actually, with Dr. McKenzie about we don't want to take steps backwards in our use of technology. Just because we can be in person, if we have found that by opening something up to a virtual event and allowing virtual participation has increased our family's engagement and our participation numbers, then there's no reason to not have that PTO meeting be available either on a link or in person as we move forward. And I think that was we spent a lot of time thinking about ways that we could support that, because a lot of people, it is just one of the barriers may be childcare, maybe transportation, maybe a number of different things. And so if we have technology that allows us to overcome those, we shouldn't stop. We shouldn't go backwards just because we can be in person.
All right, I think it's time to take a few questions.
Love it.
So, from our in-person guest, any questions?
Or thoughts?
or pushback?
Thanks, Abu. I guess my one question is, as you know, with the schools, but the city as a whole, how do we track our progress? Are there, specific metrics we're looking at as a city, or is it more generally maybe harder to quantify, but a feeling of if we are moving in the right or wrong direction going forward?
From my perspective, we are really kind of establishing a baseline, if you will, here in the city, because none of this has really been, as far as the city is concerned, really tracked before at all in any real meaningful way. So we have to understand that and build a baseline to know then what we need to do to go forward. So that's what we're kind of in the process of doing right now. As many of you know, and some of you who don't know, the city's undergoing a race equity audit right now, and it's looking at all aspects of our city government. We have hired an outside consulting firm to help us participate in this process. And those results will be public, and we'll have those either by the end of this year or beginning of next year. But it will give us a good baseline and understanding of where the gaps have existed, and recommendations what we need to do to go forward. And for sometimes city government this is how we've always done it. I think somebody said that before. So why change things? So there's been more practice as opposed to policy. And so that's what we need to take a hard look at, and that's what we are taking a hard look at. So we're building and developing that baseline right now for moving forward.
We have a question that came in through the chat, and it is, culturally responsive teaching sounds really interesting, but how will it be implemented and who will teach it as it regards to students of color?
So I think that's a great question, and thanks for asking that. I think I want to clarify. It's not a subject. It's not like English or math. You don't have a culturally responsive class. You have it embedded into everything that we do. It's like a lens that we layer over all of the lessons that we plan. So it's not culturally responsive teaching means as you're developing those lesson plans, you have this lens of equity. You're looking at your curriculum materials. You're making sure that they're representative of all of the students that you're teaching. You think about the students that are on the edges, whether it's learning disabled students or students who are advanced, and you're making sure there are opportunities within that lesson that you're reaching all of them. You're taking a look at the ways that you're allowing people to express what they know, and so you're finding those assets that students have, and they're able to express themselves, whether it's in a piece of art or in a poem or in a narrative written or on a multiple choice test, because we all know that everybody has different ways of being able to express what they know. You're making sure that the lessons that you are teaching are relevant and authentic, and they're connected to the students that are in your classroom, and they're important so kids can, I used to go to school and say, I don't need to learn that. Like, there's nothing in here that relies even to me. So it's not a thing that you teach. It's not a subject that we teach, but it's sort of an approach that you take to everything that you teach. So I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Question.
Hello, my name is Octavia. I have a concern about transportation for kids. How can we do a better job on making sure the kids are safe getting off the bus? Because there was an incident that happened with my kids. They're 5 and 6, and they were outside for 2 hours by themselves. A neighbor called me and let me know my kids were outside by themselves because whoever didn't pick them up was late or whatever, but the bus driver and the monitor just let my kids off the bus. How can we do a better job to make sure kids are safe?
I guess it's me again. No, thank you, Octavia. Thanks for your question. And, we do have safeguards that are supposed to be in place. So if there was something that didn't work, then, and you reported it, I'm sure we worked through with transportation to make sure. Our policies have that if you're in kindergarten, that you should be met by your adult, your grown-up at the bus stop. Grades 1 through 4 are, at now, they get off the bus and they are expected to go back to their home. And that, so there's not a requirement that if you're in first grade that you get off the bus and that someone's there. That's just the way that the policy is written. In terms of in practice, I think that we do have name tags and special tags that go on backpacks and ways to identify students. But those are all really good concerns. I think we work really hard. I think sometimes transportation has been a real challenge this year for everyone across the state. We've had National Guardsmen that are driving buses, so finding drivers, finding staff to be able to do it. So sometimes we have different drivers driving buses. We've been working really hard to stay one step ahead of that crisis. Today, I think we had 12 drivers that were out. So we actually sent kids home in 2 waves from the middle school. But we're working really hard on making sure that we're addressing all of those things.
I just wanted to add something from a question previously that happened in the audience about measuring our progress. And I think that surveys are a great way, to measure our progress. But I think right now, as Octavia was just expressing a concern surrounding safety, we can start there, right? And I've done some talking about policy implementation. We talk about policies. We talk about what we have in Beverly Public Schools right now. And I wonder if it might be time to revisit the policy on transportation for safety. I wonder if it might be time to revisit, policies where I talked about this before with DEI efforts implemented in our policy. And so also, I just wanted to mention in terms of barriers that maybe language, accessibility, hearing, and visual impairments may be something that we also might want to think of in terms of sending out these surveys. So the survey is a suggestion that I'm making right now to measure what we are achieving and goals that we are hitting and things that we are doing. And I think that what my suggestion is that we are sending surveys home. And the way that I would say with parents, I think we can start there just to send out surveys to say, how have things been doing? What would you like to see as a family engagement activity? What can we do to be more supportive as staff here at Beverly Public Schools? What would you like to see implemented in the policy surrounding transportation and safety? Just asking the community their thoughts is what my suggestion was. So,
I just wanted to add a simple suggestion with any concern, and I feel like I say this over and over again. If you have a concern or a question, call the school, and let us know. I'll say, Octavia, I was not aware of that particular. I've heard from you a lot, but I've not heard that particular issue, and so I think that there are some safeguards in place for that specific situation, and so I always invite families to call the school.
I just want to add one more thing. My office, Constituent Services, and Abu's office is always open. You can always contact us if you have any issue. Also, the Ask City Hall at beverlyma.gov is also a great way to get in touch with your city, and then we can kind of troubleshoot as well.
I just want to say, thank goodness, Octavia, your children were okay, and you have such caring neighbors. I think it really takes a whole community effort for all of our children, and I'm so thankful to hear that everything was okay in that particular situation. And I wanted to echo something that Principal Smith was saying earlier about providing more after-school opportunities. I think that we recognize that there is such a patchwork of opportunities or places where kids end up after the school day ends. And I think that as a community, that's something that we can do better. I know I've spoken a little bit with Dr. Churchak even today about making sure that there's accessibility, transportation, opportunities for all of our children. So much can be learned in those sort of more social after-school activities. And if we have some of those, it might alleviate some of the challenges we have with sort of piecemeal daycare situations or people that can't quite get to the bus stop exactly at 2:08 and they're a couple minutes delayed. And if the policy had been followed, perhaps the student would be riding around on a bus and maybe your caregiver wouldn't have known where to find them. And I think that's an opportunity for us to make sure all those protocols are really well known, especially with younger children, making sure those phone numbers go out so that they're in your cell phone, so that in a situation, your caregiver would know who to call to find a child. But I am just so grateful that your community, your neighbors were looking out for your children, that they're safe. So. Oh, another question.
Hello, my name is Chastity Coburn, and I am a resident of Apple Village. My daughter is in Beverly Middle School. Have we put a plan together seeking periodic auditorial meetings for teachings on ethics and cultural differences? That's another good way of getting everyone together as a whole and seeing what's really going on within the school systems. And it's a good way of educating the children on cultural differences, ethics, and some kids are in the home and not being taught those, those good behaviors. A lot of the behaviors you see in school is usually learned behaviors. It starts with the parents. So I think getting them together as a whole periodically in the auditorium or even as a group in the classroom will be a good way of teaching ethics and cultural differences as well.
Yeah, I'll start us off, and then Dr. Trocheck can talk more about it. But presently we have some student forums that are happening that are around exactly, thank you for bringing that up, around ethics and being a proper bystander if you see something happening and being vocal about that. So we have a group of peer leaders that are 8th graders, 7th and 8th graders, and they're doing a presentation to the school at each grade level. And so some grade levels have received that already, and some are in the process of getting that information. For those of you that have been at the middle school previously, we had done some Mantra Mondays, which again are lessons that teachers actually created, and we're implementing school-wide. They're a little bit different at each grade level for obvious reasons, but that's something when we come back from the holiday break that we're implementing again. We'll have a cool student of the week, but the lessons are around exactly what you're asking about. So thank you for bringing that up.
I also just want to bring Dr. Morgan into the conversation too, because he is holding these student forums at both the middle school and the high school, and for a number of different ways. Some of them are just general forums on race and racism and what is racism and how to be anti-racist and what is oppression and what are those things. But also, if a specific event happens in the community, we're making a purposeful, intentional discussion to make sure that we're talking about things that are happening. But one of the things that led to, and he and I spend a lot of time thinking about it, that it's not simple to have those conversations. The students don't all have the tools that they need to know how to talk about these things, and nor do the teachers. So we're spending a lot of time and looking through how do we make sure teachers have the opportunity to learn how to facilitate some of these discussions. How do students know how to have respectful conversation if they disagree? And those are all really, really important skills that we model and that we're really working to try to help share. And we do those in a number of different venues, but largely in these student forums, we have that opportunity to have a bit of a conversation, and then they break down into their classroom level and continue those conversations. I will admit, they're not perfect. They don't go perfect every time. We end up with some really high emotions sometimes for some kids, but that's good because that means we're doing our job and we're letting them understand that it's okay to have these conversations and to talk about it, and that way we can follow up with them and model how do you handle this kind of discourse and how do you manage to take that. So.
And I just wanted to add that maybe I know that in the curriculum standards there is civics and leadership, and I'm just wanted to add that I wonder if that might be a place that we could also expand that to incorporate ethics as well. And thank you.
So Hannah Bowen, I live downtown and was just elected along with Brendan as one of your at-large city councilors. So glad to be able to listen tonight. And my question is just to dig a little bit more into listening opportunities. Heard a lot about that, curiosity and listening and being in conversation. So curious, beyond surveys, which I think are a great idea, and some of the teaching tools, what other kinds of listening tools are you using with students, between students, with families, listening sessions, meeting people when they're at sporting events or other places they're already at to get some of this feedback so that it's not only when there's, an incident that needs to be reported formally and taking on that burden, but just constant, regular invitations for opportunities to share and listen.
Oh, sorry.
Well, one, we're here, and this has been a series that we've put together. We really do believe that the best way to be a listener is to kind of get where we need to go and hear what people have to say. I know that, and I'm sure that at the middle school and at the high school, I know Mrs. Taylor, you may want to talk a little bit about some of the conversations that you've had with students, but inviting students in and saying, how can we help? Or what would you do in this situation? For example, if we've had a particular scenario that involves an underrepresented group within the building, inviting them in and saying, gee, I'm really sorry this happened. How can we help? What do you think? What is a good way for us to kind of move forward from this? So I don't know. Yeah.
I think the age group that at the high school, these are young adults, who want to have a voice and have a point of view. And I think, especially in the last few years, kids have done a lot of outreach themselves and saying, I got something that's bothering me and I want to talk to you about it. And that's actually been very helpful to me because I do get a different perspective. We have been working on our student forums. We're going to have another one December 15th. I have some student committee groups, like our climate committee and our student council, that also bring concerns to the school and the administration in general. And then we also have lots of clubs that are also concerned about their world, both immediately in the school and the greater world, like the Human Rights Club, National Honor Society with its community service, our Key Club with more community service. So I think what we can say is our young people care about the world around them and they want to make a difference in that world. And I think a lot of them have learned to speak up more, and we try to provide some opportunities for them to tell us what they think. And I've had lots of young people, they take the initiative. They're the ones that say, you need to hear what I have to say. So it's been pretty impressive with that.
I just want to make a comment. One thing I want to, first of all, thank Abu and Dr. Morgan and the panelists for being here tonight. That's, a year and a half ago when I started coming up here, Like I said, it was an island of itself, and it was neglected for years by no one's fault, just the fact that it was not easily getting here. The things we've talked about for the last year and a half within the city, that we've actively been mindful and looking at these situations, we had it right here in our backyard. And you know, I give credit to the mayor as well as to Abu and Dr. Morgan and anyone that's here right now. Is they've been actively coming up here to make sure that people up here especially are being included into the city. You know, here we have this discussion of many community meetings that we're having. We had a first one at the middle school. We're having it here at Apple Village. And I want to thank, you know, Dr. Morgan and Abu especially for really listening to me and listening to you. I mean, you know, I've heard it from you, but I have a question to the residents up here especially is how do we as the city get better communicating to you guys? How do we are able to get that information out to you guys?
My name is Rosa, and I've been in Apple Village almost 30 years. First, I have a couple questions. My daughter's going to kill me because my first question is, this forum that's going on, no one's here from Apple Village. I stumbled across it by accident on the internet, and I'm 64, not computer inclined at all. Accidentally, I stumbled across this meeting, this forum, whatever. So my question is, how can you communicate to let the residents know this is what's going on here? That's my first question. My second question is, racism is very important, and we all know that. But I didn't hear anyone talk about bullying. And there's a lot of residents up here with children. This is my oldest. My youngest is 35, so I have no children in the school except for David Lee. Yeah, David Lee, my grandson. And I accommodate you for following the middle school from the Cove. So my question is, what's being done with the bullying, calling the kids that are fat? I have a lot of parents that have come and spoken to me. I worked for Beverly for 20 years as a bus driver. Some people don't know me, but I drove special need. So that's one of my questions. No one addressed that, and I think that's very important. It's one of very important special need children and children that are overweight, that have acne, that don't dress like everyone else. How are we addressing that problem? And also, trying to get all the residents here. I stumbled across this. You and I had many discussions on communication. No one's knocking on doors. No one is inviting anyone. I invited her. Accidentally, I came across it. Crystal, she told me not to mention it, but I have to. I have to, because we need to get everyone in here. And I'm like confused. I'm confused.
We don't receive flyers anymore.
So,
but those are my
so Rosa,
questions, you know.
Rosa, I'll speak to you quickly on the whole lack of communication. Unfortunately, the lack of communication, you know as well as management, is challenging up here sometimes. We've gotten a little better. So we know that. So I mean, that's one thing.
Yes.
And you know, so for me, when I come up here once a month and several times a month, it really is. I'm a guest up here.
You know,
we're working the strives and everything like that. So communication's always, and then I agree with you. Knocking on doors is very for you guys.
We discussed that. So you should have changed it by now, because we discussed it a couple months ago. So that's really no excuse.
I agree with you, and unfortunately, I'm still at the mercy of the management here. So I mean, that's just a quick answer on that. Neither here. But the other question that I'm going to let Dr. Chorocek in regards to that.
Just Keisha, do you want to?
Yeah. So the flyers, I just want to say that and I don't know, maybe someone can help me with this, but there was a resident outreach worker. Her name was Tiffany. And I thought she used to deliver the flyers in everyone's door. And so as far as I know, that position's not there anymore, and she's not there. So I wonder if, and I'm asking, I don't know, has that position?
Are you here?
No, I used to live here, so I don't anymore. That's why I'm asking. So I wonder if that position has been filled and maybe hasn't been filled, and maybe that's...
Hold on, but my understanding is this is not an Apple Village meeting. This is a meeting for the city of Beverly. So there's no other residents here from the city of Beverly. There's not even any seating here of other residents. like residents of the city of Beverly outside of this little island that we're on. So, I mean, how are we getting that information out to the other residents? Because, okay, Apple Village has their own issue. We have our own issue here with.
Yeah, that's what I was speaking
But
to.
what
Was
about the other residents, the other children, the other families that do not live in Apple Village?
Yeah.
How? Because my son is in preschool. I didn't get anything.
I know that it was posted on the website, but I'll hand it over to Dr. Morgan.
And so that was my question to you about the surveys, because surveys sound good, but as we know, here is an issue, and this meeting, like if this is a series, what number is this? Because I would have loved to have been a part of this series. And how often do you guys meet? We would love to be a part of this.
Well, wonderful. We want you to be a part of it. And so I want to tackle each of the questions, and then we're going to bring this to a close because I know that time is running out. So, Ms. Rosa, is it?
Yes. Right.
All right. So I want to tackle both of your questions.
Okay, thank
you. All right. So one, in terms of residents being aware, I think you bring an important question to the table, an important comment. Getting families engaged is a challenging and difficult task. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, nor is there a magic bullet. And so while there are measures that both the district and the city undertook in order to get the word out, it's dependent upon folks getting engaged, folks getting motivated and saying, you know what, I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of the change and make a difference. I'm going to put a bench there before I talk about bullying, because I heard you say that this is a City of Beverly meeting. As part of the community conversation piece, the thing that we want to do is reach the entire community. And it's not enough for us to just say from a school district perspective or even from the city perspective, hey, we want to hold this conversation on our turf and you come to us. So we decided that as a group, we were going to bring the conversation into the community. That's one way that we're showing that we're serious about this community outreach and how we want people to get involved. But what we really need, if I can be transparent, is we need people to meet us halfway. If we're coming halfway to the table, we need people to meet us halfway in order to solve some of these issues and to deal with some of these things that we've been talking about tonight. No.
I'm so sorry. I think the problem is actually them receiving the message to come.
Right.
Like, it's just the lack of not getting the message out there that there is a meeting. And that was the problem.
Yeah, and that's valid. So this becomes a learning opportunity as well. Mm-hmm. And so we learn from you all just as you hear from us in terms of how we can get engaged in continuous improvement. Let me say a quick word about anti-bullying, because it is an issue. And so very often we chunk bullying off and say that it's just kids being kids. Well, it's not kids being kids, because kids are dealing with some things that those of us in older generations have never had to deal with. And so from a anti-bullying perspective, that's becoming a part of our culture in the district, and I know it's becoming a part of the culture in the city, because our kids, when they leave the school, they go right into the community. And so we're standing up these conversations, we're standing up these forums, we're standing up these events in school on not a daily basis, but at least on a weekly basis. We're doing something where we're approaching and we're dealing with anti-bullying. You know, the reality about that is we've got to teach kids how to communicate with each other. And then we also have to teach families how to do the same and then communicate with kids so that the message becomes corresponding on both ways. And so Principal Oliver and Principal Taylor both mentioned the initiatives that are going on in school. Part of those deal specifically with anti-bullying. How do you address anti-bullying? And in fact, we did a district piece that was spearheaded by our superintendent and assistant superintendent to really help to incorporate messages of anti-bullying in every single classroom, right? And so as part of the instruction, part of the curriculum, we're embedding these conversations. How do you deal with some of these tensions? How do you deal with some of these conflicts? Because it's not enough for us to hear about it and pass it off, but now we've got to do something about it, and so that becomes our way. Are we at 100% perfection? No, we're still learning. But this is why that there's a community conversation so we can learn and grow. If you really want to know why we're talking about race and safety and all of these other issues that have come to the table, it's so that we learn how to grow as a community, how to care for each other as a community, and how to all strive to be change agents in the community so that we're not sitting back passively just letting things happen. But when we see things happen and there's an injustice that's taking place, that we step in and become a part of the solution rather than a continued part of the problem. We've so enjoyed our time here with you on this evening. Again, this is a series. You talked about the series. We're striving to stand this up every 6 weeks, and we're hoping to rotate communities so that this conversation isn't in a siloed setting or it's in one singular setting, but it reaches the community. So we thank you for your ideas. We thank you for your pushback. We thank you for your comments, because that's how we all grow, both from a district perspective and from the city as well. So thank you for being a part. Thank you, Council Ward Member Rotundo, for opening up the Apple Village space and allowing us to be here in this season at this time to start the conversation. I know the time is of the essence. We're cutting this, but I'm going to ask our panelists if they might stick around just for a couple minutes for any questions that the audience may have. Thanks for joining us this evening.